Okay, nice. So yeah, this is my effort to kind of distill down some thoughts around hierarchical action policies. It's definitely not clear in my head yet, so this is very much going to be just kind of like an amalgamation of stuff. But yeah, hopefully that's, I guess, the point that we'll talk through this. And also, it's not like these are really new ideas. It's more just about kind of trying to structure how we think about this and yeah, to sort of think through it. And it relates also, to, for example, Rajesh Rao's presentation. There's definitely a lot of similarities to there as well. But yeah, so I thought, yeah, so kind of in terms of what the aim of all this we're kind of doing is, I guess, these hierarchical action policies are really about kind of, flexible agent behavior and efficient agent behavior that can really kind of impact the world. And yeah, kind of handle arbitrary novel situations and things like that. And I think we all have kind of an intuition about how hierarchy helps with efficiency and flexibility, but yeah, we can maybe just work through it a little bit. But yeah, at the same time as we're kind of doing this, we talked previously about how it feels like we need to also kind of understand better how we're going to represent object behaviors. And I think that is true in order to really come up with kind of meaningful hierarchical action policies. So that's a lot of what I'll kind of talk about today. And I thought just like a first kind of useful thing would be just to give some kind of basic definitions, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same, kind of coming from the same point. And yeah, in particular, so action policy, I mean, this one's pretty basic. Yeah, basically a set of actions to take to achieve a goal. This is typically a condition on the state of the agent and the world. Reinforcement learning is kind of methods to learn an action policy given reward signals. And there's kind of two main flavors of reinforcement learning: model free, which has been very popular for many years, where you basically just learn an action policy directly from the rewards that are associated with the actions you take. But you don't actually learn kind of a model of the world to kind of use in the future. You basically just learn kind of, okay, this action was good, so I'm going to do this action again.
Well, it can still be state condition, so it's not
right. Yeah.
So you still use the sensory input, but you just don't have like a model of the world.
Yeah, that you could kind of roll out in a mental simulation to decide kind of like, okay, how's it going to respond? But yeah, more relevant to kind of the approach that I think we are all thinking about is this more model-based reinforcement learning, where you explicitly learn this kind of model, which is often called a transition model or a transition function of the world. And then you also kind of can learn a reward model that basically tells you how valuable being in certain states are. And then with those two, so understanding how what causes one to move between states, and then understanding what rewards are associated with particular states, then it's very easy to kind of develop policies on the fly and adapt as necessary. So, if a wall gets, or kind of a blockage gets put on a road, you can kind of refer to the model and find a way to go around it. And yeah, and in general, the kind of holy grail is to kind of learn these models in an unsupervised fashion. And then, you can leverage reinforcement learning as necessary when, there's states that are important, that are useful. But the hope is to really kind of, learn the transition model first so that you can leverage it later.
Before you go on, I think you touched on this here, but I've always been uncomfortable with the reward sort of, reinforcement learning with rewarding, like, because it seems like so much that we do is, you mentioned getting around an obstacle. Well, it's not really a reward-based learning system. It's, it's a model system, right? I have a model, I'm trying to get to some state, and I use the model to get to that state. I don't even have to learn that action policy. I just use the model and execute it, and then next time the road won't be blocked. So I guess all I'm stating is I think you're getting at it here, but the whole idea of a reward model, reward system, even for model-based reinforcement learning, I think is a bit of a red herring, and we shouldn't focus on it, right? We really just say, you know, we have these models, how do we achieve various results based on, you know, given a desired outcome, how do we do that? And it doesn't have to be reward based at all. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I just want to make clear.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to say here, was that like when you like at least from my reading of the literature, you rarely see studies that just go into transition model and learn the transition model. There's so much focus on reinforcement learning generally when it comes to policies that it's almost always kind of baked in.
That's right. The only reason I brought it up, because in your first sentence here, it says along with a model of rewards, and certainly
because that is how it's defined, even though
okay.
I mean, well, because yeah,
right.
but yeah, so in a moment I'll specifically drill down into the transition model, but yeah.
But not necessarily, like often you can learn a transition model without rewards. Like you can learn the transition model using prediction errors, for example, but then learn the policy of how to best go through this transition model using reinforcement learning. But you could use the same model and then apply some other planning algorithm on top of it, and you would have never used reinforcement learning. So
yeah,
the
so I mean,
part doesn't need to involve reward.
No, for sure, and that's what I mean by unsupervised learning here. I'm just, from what I saw in, like, for example, with hierarchical reinforcement learning, like there's like they almost always talk about reinforcement learning, even though, like you say, it's not essential, and in fact we would ideally only use it at the last point, but it's often kind of
you don't even have to use it
there
at the last point. If it's you know, if I have a sufficient model of the world and I'm just trying to get to some state, you know, I don't need it's just, I don't know, I think we said enough here, but I think we should really focus on this model-based transition model. So I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, just the kind of classic example of this from neuroscience is Tolman's work with rodents, where basically they would kind of explore kind of maze-like structures and given no reward. And then if you took those and they would kind of explore it seemingly haphazardly, but if you then took those mice that had had a chance to explore the maze and then gave them just like a single reward, they would very quickly learn or be able to kind of move through the maze to reach their reward, in comparison to ones that kind of were trying to learn how to get to the food from the start. And it kind of suggested that they built this sort of world model, this kind of cognitive map, and that's what they were leveraging. And I think, again, a lot of reinforcement learning and this kind of whole like action kind of sensory motor kind of action-based learning is very focused on an agent interacting in an environment. What I think makes Numenta unique is we're trying to kind of capture this sort of concept, but at every level of representation, that we're kind of saying this isn't just something that's like, oh, how does an agent interact within the environment? It's like, how do we understand essentially everything, including objects?
Right.
And so, yeah, we basically want a cognitive map for all of the models that are going to be relevant.
And like drawing the parallel to Monty here, basically learning the maze is what we do right now, learning the object models in Monty. And then the reinforcement learning part would be saying, okay, I have this model of a cup and I want to achieve the state. How do I do this? And then achieving the state would give you the reward, but it has nothing to do with learning the model of the cup. That's kind of independent.
I'm arguing you don't even need a reward. I mean, you have to know that you've accomplished the goal, but
in the computational sense of it, basically just telling it you accomplished the goal.
Right, right. I mean, you know, the fact of, you know, do we lay down memories of how we solve the problem? Yes, we do, for the most part, but not always. In a maze like this, surely I would remember, oh, I solved it. Next time I'll be quicker. But, you know, manipulating the stapler, I may never manipulate the stapler the same way again. I might do it a different way next time. I don't know. It doesn't always have to have this reward signal, and we don't even always have to learn our solution. We can, but sometimes it's a one-off solution, and I'm done, and I keep going on. You know. Anyway, I think we said enough about that. But I have said enough about it.
But yeah, so the kind of typically this this kind of model of things is termed a transition model or transition function, and yeah, it's basically the kind of set of states of an environment or an object, those states, and then the associated transitions that occur between those states and kind of how they happen. So often it's kind of conditioned on some sort of action. And the simplest would be a deterministic mapping between states. So you're in one state and you deterministically transition through a series of states. Obviously, that wouldn't be very interesting. Or you can have kind of a simple matrix of probabilities that basically tells you kind of what is your chance of randomly going from one state into another state. But yeah, more often it's kind of conditioned on an action, and it takes the form of some kind of arbitrary function. Which may be probabilistic. And it can be hierarchical. So I did find some kind of discussion, for example, of this in the literature, because we were talking about, presumably, yeah, others have thought about this. And I thought there was, yeah, a particularly useful paper from Matthew Botnovic, I think, from 2014, where, yeah, he talks about kind of hierarchical reinforcement learning, hierarchical transition models.
Is that the one you sent me?
No, I'll mention that one as well. That was the one I sent, was the one that was linked in Rajesh's paper, which I also did look at briefly. Yeah, I'll come back to that one.
So I didn't read it. It was all math.
It was, and it's very long. Yeah, sorry, I should have looked at it closer before I sent it to you.
So I spent only a little bit of time on it. I said, well,
Okay.
I'll let you read that first.
But yeah, and then the other thing is kind of often this action is kind of described as the action of the agent, and again, as I was mentioning, often this kind of literature, it's all about like an agent moving in an environment, like a room. But I think it's useful, and I think it's fair to take kind of a more general view of this kind of action as just kind of an influence on the state. So it could be kind of anything from gravity to the influence of another object. It could be the behavior of another agent, kind of flapping its wings, and we're observing that, or we're intuiting that it might be doing that. And then, of course, it could be an action of the agent itself. And then, yeah, and arguably maybe also kind of internally driven, things like the elasticity in a rubber band, although maybe this is captured fully in like the state itself. But just the kind of idea that it's not like everything is just like completely passive, and the only way that anything changes in the world is by the agent going out there and interacting with things. Things are much more kind of fluid than that. There are many things that can influence other things, transitioning through states. And yeah, and so this kind of, yeah, feels like a natural way to kind of start to connect the kind of object behavior with the kind of representation that's going to support planned actions, where kind of, yeah, hopefully once we somehow learn this kind of transition function, transition model, represent it in a kind of useful way, then that can support kind of really powerful action policies. And then just again, because partly this is because the terminology out there, yeah, I figure we might come across it, and it's just useful to understand kind of how it all hangs together and how it relates to what we're trying to do. So there's also this notion of hierarchical reinforcement learning. And basically, yeah, this is kind of standard reinforcement learning. It can be model-based or model-free. And you're kind of trying to learn action policies, but where these action policies can abstract over time or states. So, if you imagine in this diagram, you have to take this series of kind of actions down this tree to reach a particular goal state. You might kind of learn a way to kind of lump these together so that this first one is kind of like, okay, I'm opening the door, and this one is like, I'm getting out my car keys or something like that, rather than the minutiae of motor movements that you have to do in order to achieve those kind of sub goals. And of course, that's much more efficient to plan. It's much easier to do credit assignment and all this kind of stuff. But again, you don't necessarily need the kind of, if you're just trying to achieve a reward, a state, then I guess as you're saying, Jeff, like the reward learning part maybe isn't necessarily that that relevant. If you just know you need to get into a state and you know the structure of the world, you can just get into that state.
You know what, the funny thing about that diagram
Yeah.
is that if I think about actions and action policies, this says there's one path to any endpoint, any end state. But that's not true in the world. There's
Right.
many paths to get to there. So I was looking at these lines saying, oh, do they connect? No, they don't. This says this is an ideal solution, but in reality, you should be able to get there from anywhere. You know, it's like, yeah, you can have that end state, but there's multiple paths to get there. So this kind of diagram doesn't capture that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
I think you're arguing about the chunking of actions or the hierarchical nature of these actions. I think it's a good illustration of that, but it doesn't capture the nature of the problem completely.
Right. Yeah, and then I mean, this is just another diagram kind of trying to show this kind of abstraction that, you know, yeah, you can do these kinds of temporal abstractions over like a series of actions, or you can do more kind of a state abstraction. So kind of chunking that, okay, what's the high level concept that we care about? The high level state, it's the agent has the key, and so forth. But
okay, yeah, you think
yeah, go ahead.
the state abstraction seems somehow more relevant to me than the temporal. It's like, yeah, the state abstraction is the first thing you do, I think, right? You don't. It seems like the first thing you do is you say, you know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I mean, we're kind of already doing this because obviously, yeah, again, we don't want to just know models at the highest level of detail or whatever, and like, yeah, we want kind of relatively abstract models of the world. So that's kind of something I guess, yeah, we're already doing.
Yeah, okay.
With hierarchy. But yeah, what's interesting is kind of if you look at these papers, generally a lot of the literature is focused on this kind of model-free. If it's, I mean, whether it's hierarchical or not, a lot of reinforcement learning is focused on model-free, but particularly kind of this, the hierarchical reinforcement learning, basically because kind of learning hierarchical world/object models is not necessarily that easy to do. Like, yeah, as you're saying, Vivian, there's unsupervised signals like kind of predicting the next image or whatever that you can use to inform them. But I think it partly just relates to the kind of the kinds of ways that a hierarchical model is being represented. As far as I've seen, it tends to be fairly shallow yeah, relatively simple systems like which I think the next time we do a brainstorming, I can maybe get into like learning how like a set of particles interact and stuff like that with kind of a world model. But yeah, but of course, it can be model-based, and that's maybe where we'll come in. So then the kind of last definition just to mention is this term options, which again, you might come across. And my understanding is basically just a term for this kind of chunking of actions together into kind of a more temporally abstract manner. And so like an option would be something like open door. And then if you kind of select that option, then that's going to initiate its own sub policy and kind of play out until it's done.
You're saying this is a term that's used in the literature?
Yeah.
So it doesn't imply a choice. It just, you're saying it just says it's like an abstract action that may be done different ways or something like that. When I think of options, I think like, oh, you have 3 options, A, B, C, which one do you want?
I mean, I guess yeah, in this case, you do have, so you could open the door, you could lie down on the sofa, or you could turn on the TV or whatever. Those are your options. I mean, I don't really know why they're called options. But anyways, but then once you select one, then you're going to have a different policy that sorts out actually executing that.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, Vivian, do you have a sense why they're called options? Like, oh, I don't know if she's frozen.
Vivian's frozen. She's frozen in a good pose, so she looks good. very, very pensive. You were frozen there for a minute.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, do you have a deeper sense maybe of why they're called options? The-
Yeah, I also am not sure why, but that's definitely a term. It's like in the reinforcement learning book from Sutton and Bartow, and they have a whole chapter on it. I guess it's just to distinguish it from the term actions, even though they are kind of actions, just higher level actions.
Right. Okay.
Okay,
I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
No, that makes sense. Thanks.
it'll probably take me a while to absorb that. Okay.
So yeah, so that's all the kind of definitions out of the way, just so we're all on exactly the same page now.
Sure.
But yeah, just then to kind of again take a step back. So the kind of challenge is, yeah, we want to learn this transition model of objects across multiple hierarchies, these kind of object behaviors. But not only that, we kind of need to learn how kind of motor systems would interact with these with the transition model to kind of achieve a desired goal state. So it's this kind of intersection of object behaviors and action policies, which are kind of clearly related, but also kind of not equivalent. So I thought as a first thing, I would try and just kind of walk through how I'm kind of conceptualizing the transition models at the moment and how kind of it maybe ties in with the sort of cortical anatomy as we've been recently discussing. And so, yeah, this is going to be focusing on kind of object behavior, and it's not going to get into kind of hierarchy yet. So if we just imagine kind of we have a model, a learning module that has learned kind of a model of a stapler. We have these different layers. If I've kind of, for these layers that I've just had one color, it's because I don't necessarily have a good reason for subdividing the layer, but maybe that's something that will come up in the discussion today. But yeah. And so kind of using the term.
Can I just,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
again, the word transition model, I want to try to understand what you mean by that. Why don't you just rephrase what that means in a sentence? Is that how,
yes.
how the morphology of the stapler changes? Is that what it means? Like,
so it's how the state of the object changes with the environment over time.
Okay, so it could be,
but state might capture quite a lot of things.
Yeah, right. But it could be like the stapler going up and down. It could be the icons changing on the screen. So that transition model is really it's the state of the object and how the states transition between each other.
Yes, but it could also be where we are on the object.
Why would that be a model? That just seems to be a temporary.
So the model is tells us how transitions take place. So it's not that the location on the object is a model. It's just, for example, grid cells and our understanding of path integration would be part of the transition model, because they tell us that if we move through space, then our location will be updated, where the location is part of our state. On the object will be updated.
That's confusing to me, because to me, there's a model how my sensor moves, my finger moves through space under different motor behaviors. But that to me seems very largely independent of the model of the stapler itself.
Yeah.
Really it's just all about staplers,
Yeah, I guess that's where I feel like they are related, because, well, yeah, maybe if I just go through kind of.
Okay. All right. Well, you had a question mark there. I'm not sure why, but I had a question mark too. So maybe
yeah. No, that's fair.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, how I was most thinking of it originally is that the transition model it's basically how actions move you through the state space. So
okay, but those actions would be relative to the object, not really. It doesn't matter what finger I'm using or anything like that, right? It's like the action would be specified in the model. It's like the top of the stapler has to be pushed down relative to, something like that. I kind of separate out this model of the stapler, which has these behaviors and does various things, or the model of a smartphone, and I can separate that out from
how right at this moment, where my body is and how I'm interacting with it. It's because, you know, I can push the stapler down with my elbow. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in its simplest form, it's basically saying if I'm in this state and I take that action, what state will I be in next, or
Right.
what will
But
I see?
I'm saying that the action should be in the models, the definition of the model, not the definition of how my fingers moving through space.
Yeah,
That's
and
all.
this
You know?
okay, but so I kind of feel like it should maybe be both. As in, so yeah, so humor me for a moment. I guess if the state is capturing a set of things, so the state is it's more complex than just where we are on the object, and it's more complex than just the state of the object, like whether it's open or closed. It's basically a set of these things. So, for example, it could capture, yeah, where we are on the object, the sensed feature we're experiencing, the object ID, and the object pose, and then I think we arguably also want some kind of object state type representation, which might be wrapped up in this L2, L3, like, yeah, open versus closed, subject to gravity. You know, just it could be fairly flexible.
Okay, well, I guess if I have a learned behavior, like my default behavior is to use my index finger, push down on the stapler, and you know, maybe that's sort of a fits your model there, like that's because it matters where my finger is. That's not the way I think about it. The way I've thought about it in the past is more like the stapler has its own model, how it behaves, and then I can apply my body to it in different ways. But we can go with this for now. It feels like those should be separated to me, but you can make the argument otherwise.
Okay, yeah, I can maybe. I mean, they're still kind of separate, but I guess I just feel like they're kind of entangled as well. So let's just say there is some transition model that somehow kind of captures all of this, like basically how all of this is going to change given some the current state, the current set of all these kind of state variables, and some action.
But like,
and
oh,
yeah, go ahead.
so the variables you showed on the slide before, they would not necessarily all be in layer 5. It would be more like they would be represented in other layers.
Yeah.
And layer 5 tells us how to move through those given actions.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, so xt is in L6. Sorry, I should have made that clear. xt is meant to be in L6. ft is meant to be more in L4. ot and pt are up in L2, L3.
Okay, yeah.
So none of these are in L5.
Yeah, just because technically that would all be part of the transition model. But basically what you're saying is L5 is just telling us the routing between.
Yeah, how to kind of move between them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's more this model itself that's maybe in L5 rather than the states representations. And this transition model itself is also subject to change. It isn't totally fixed. So just then kind of going through some examples. So the kind of simplest action would be a movement through space, which would, affect kind of xt plus 1. This could be via kind of a direct connection, and this could just be hypothetical, like a predicted, we get a predicted location and then a predicted sensation. Or if this action actually gets executed in the real world, then via kind of sensor movement, then the actual ft plus 1, like the actual sensory feature at the next point, is going to change. So this is how the kind of state variable, the state representation is changing. And this can also, these changes can also then influence, for example, the object model. If, suddenly we decide, okay, actually it looks more like this mug that I'm on, and so forth. So that's kind of a simple way that actions are kind of changing the overall state of the system. And the transition model here is very simple. It's basically kind of, path integration or something like that. But a more kind of complex action, like persistent downward pressure on the stapler head or something like that, could affect the state of the object and kind of put it into, stapler depressed mode or whatever. And here the kind of transition model is definitely going to be more complex in order to capture that. And yeah, later I'll eventually hopefully talk about kind of what that, how we might represent kind of how we might capture a transition model that could do something like that. And then lastly, the object state. So for example, if the stapler is opened, or of course, if the ID changes, can influence the transition model. So, we'd expect the transition model to be different, probably from different objects, at least in many respects. But also the state of the object might influence that. So basically how your actions are influencing the world. And that could be as simple as kind of, when the stapler is open, if I'm on one location and I, go to another, I'd expect something different versus if it's closed. But of course, a more complex object, as you kind of interact with it, that might make new affordances available. When you close the stapler, that's when you can actually use the stapler. When you open the stapler, that's when you can load it, etc. And I think here, then the transition model is even more complex because then suddenly the whole kind of notion of space and all this kind of stuff becomes a lot more flexible. But yeah, but I feel like it's all like all of these things are kind of part of this this possibility of kind of actions can happen, the system can change, and the state of the system can change, but different parts of this kind of state may be affected, and they can also influence one another. So it's not as simple as just like there's this environment where we are kind of moving through it, and then there's actions that we're taking. It all kind of feeds back. Yeah, that was that part. Jeff, in terms of what you were saying, do you feel like it's fair that, like, if I understood you, it sounded like what you were kind of saying was sort of like along this line, this kind of example, that kind of actions are affecting the state of the object ID.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Or like the object representation, the object level state.
Yeah. First of all, I like this diagram a lot. I think it's a good thought-provoking picture. I don't think it's necessarily clear in my mind all the different things you mean by it, and I probably have different interpretations of it, but it's a good way to start thinking about it. If you want to start brainstorming a bit, I can do that. But if you want to keep going on your presentation, I can wait.
Yeah, I could just do the last bit and then hopefully maybe like why. Yeah, then at least it's clear what I was thinking. Oh, just before I forget, it was really bothering me. So when I was labeling this, I wrote kind of feature detectors and feature location / binding cells. The feature detect, what were the name of those cells that you said are kind of they have a specific tuning response, which they fire fairly consistently, and then so they could kind of basically determine the selectivity of a microcolumn. Because it's not bipolar cells. I mean, that's in the
well, they are they are a flavor of bipolar cells, and they go by the term. Oh gosh.
They're not a type of stellate cell or something like that?
No, not the stellate cells.
Okay.
Oh gosh, I'm forgetting words as they get older. But I've always had trouble with this word. I have a picture of what they look like in my head. They're really skinny with the dendrites and axons very limited in size. And sometimes some papers just call them bipolar cells, but others do a fine distinction and
okay, yeah, no, it's not that important. It was just it was bugging me.
I should know it. It's a word that not everyone uses. That's why it's hard to keep it in my mind.
Yeah.
If you want,
if you think of it,
your reference to it, then just send me a link or send me a message and I'll try to remember to send you a link to some of them.
I'll do that. Thanks.
What the actual name is not universally agreed upon.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so then, of course, the whole point in all this was to bring in hierarchy. So then, okay, yeah, how might hierarchy play into this? So again, if you just kind of humor me for a moment. So if you imagine kind of, yeah, okay, we want to use a stapler. So we kind of move to the stapler in the office space when we kind of need to depress the stapler. So that's kind of a change of the stapler state. If you imagine there's kind of a stapler level representation of the object. And that involves kind of moving to the stapler head and then applying downward pressure on the stapler head. So kind of a change in the stapler head state. Kind of maybe more complex one might be, make coffee, where again, it's beneficial to have hierarchy where you kind of can skip over or kind of have these options that you pick amongst. And, once these are fulfilled, once the machine has water, once that state is achieved, then you can then move on to kind of turn on the coffee machine. And again, this is kind of changing the machine state. And then in order to do that, you need to press the start button, which is changing the button state. Oh, sorry, I meant to break down the slide. Let me just quickly do that. Sorry, it's
right.
A lot of text.
You just tell us to ignore
it. So, yeah, I guess a lot of hierarchical action policy stuff that I could see was talking about what do you call it? You send down these actions and then those produce sub actions and stuff like that. But I wondered whether to a certain degree, we also want more kind of top-down feedback that's passing a goal state. And so what this might then mean is like, basically the transition model would then be conditioned not just on our current state and the kind of current action, but what you call it? This should be, yeah, sorry, this should be our current action is conditioned not just in our current state, but also on our goal state. And basically this would continue until the transition, until the state of the system achieves the kind of the goal state.
But so the transition model is not the same as the policy, right? I mean,
no. Yeah.
So
yeah, sorry. So that's why I should have a separate line for this.
Okay, so it would not be output. The output would not be the next state. It would be the next action, and it would be independent of the transition model. It would just be, yeah, using the transition model as one of its conditioning elements.
Yeah. No, I I was getting a bit tired maybe when I wrote this one. But yeah, but they kind of, then the thought is that, okay, so you pass this goal state to a learning module, and then it's basically going to kind of transition through this by initiating the, whatever policy it has until it reaches that goal state. And, that final state, it kind of depends on how it's specified, but it might, involve probably most likely something about the kind of representation at the L2, L3 layer. So the kind of object level representation, but achieving it might involve some kind of interim location XT. And so, with the example of the stapler, so maybe, you're passing in this goal state, okay, we want the stapler to be depressed. So then this learning module knows that in order to get it into that state.
Is that what the black line represents? It's the desired goal state? Is that what that is?
That's the top-down feedback from a higher level learning module.
You're now drawing it like a neuroscientist after our last meeting. So
yeah, and then this is meant to be apical, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, then this learning module kind of, because of its transition model of the stapler, it kind of maybe knows that, okay, I need to get to the location, which is the head of the stapler. and then maybe at that point, it needs to pass on the kind of responsibility to an even lower level learning module, or maybe at that point it can finish things. But if it needs to pass down things, maybe then it kind of passes, okay, to the stapler head model, you now need to be in a state where you have like a force going down on you, something like that, and then the stapler head model then kind of takes over. And I guess then, yeah, if the learning module is basically kind of making progress in kind of achieving its target state, then it just kind of sends motor outputs from L5, and those get kind of executed. But if it's for some reason, because of its kind of insufficient model of the world, or because of the level of hierarchy it's at, if it needs something else to be achieved, then it basically sends a target state to another learning module. And so that's where kind of like perhaps like making coffee, you'd kind of progress through this, and then, okay, you've achieved fill machine with coffee, and then you go to the next step, but now you need the machine to have water. So you're going to pass kind of a goal state to other learning modules, say, okay, the machine needs water, and kind of offload that.
Yeah, I like the notion of sending goal states instead of actions. It's kind of similar to what we have right now, only that our goal state right now can only capture the location of the sensor. And then basically we would add more to the state. So like the state of the world is the location of the sensor, but also location of and pose of the object and state of the object. And then basically you could say, yeah, I want to make coffee. So I'm going to tell you, I need the coffee pot in this state. So coffee pot at this location and pose. I need the hand at this location and pose. And then those can say, okay, to put the coffee pot there, I need the hand to move in this location. And then basically those goal states would be translated into action sequences somewhere else. I guess my main question would be then, like, where would the goal state turn into actions, and where does the policy actually live? Is it also in the column, or is it then somewhere else?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah. So that's yeah, exactly. And yeah, so basically, so it can also, so L5 in this is because I looked, I think I saw something that L5 can send top-down connections. So the kind of, that would be where it's kind of sending goal states, and then, but it also has this policy that can just generate actions. So the policy, yeah, would also kind of exist here, but it just kind of.
Just a quick, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm not aware that L5 has hierarchical projections down. I think it's all layer 6. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Okay, I'll need to double check.
Well, there's so much literature here that it's easy. It's like, but I if all this makes sense to me in some sense. I'm hesitant to interrupt you because I want you to get through it. But the way I'm thinking about this is, imagine a single learning module has to be able to do an action policy and has to be able to put the staple into some, it has to be able to take a model and put it into some state. Because if it's going to happen in the cortex, it's going to happen in every learning module. So, and we can then add hierarchy on top of that. And one way to think about it is that I agree, the top down, if someone says, somebody has to provide this learning module and says, we wanted to press the stapler. And then this learning module would say, well, okay, you're telling me to get into some state of the stapler, and I know its current state, and then it can say, well, where is my finger right now? And then I then generate a behavior based on my current location of my finger. It's like wherever my finger is right now, I'm going to generate the behavior, correct? So to my mind, it's like L6 represents where your finger is. Somebody's trying to tell you what state you want to be in. And the combination of where my finger is and the model state then generates an action in layer 5, which says, okay, this is the specific action I need to implement to move my finger to do that goal and move the model to that state. So it's an interaction between, this is what I was saying earlier, layer 6 in my mind is not really part of the model. It's it's the contemporaneous position of your sensor or your body, and you're saying, well, if you want me to put this in some state, I can calculate what I need to do to get it into that state, given my current position, and that's going to be calculated in layer 5. That's how I viewed it. But again,
Yeah.
right? Imagine I have 10 fingers on the stapler. I'm holding it in both hands, and I have 10 learning modules that are all modeling the stapler. They all have a model of the stapler. They all know the same state of the stapler. They all agreeing we're in this state. And then I put a top-down request to the whole layer, meaning all 10 learning modules, and they all could calculate how to move their specific finger to achieve the goal. And one of them is going to do it, but I could do another one. I could, my point is that there are now 10 fingers. There's 10 different ways I can move to push the stapler down, and each one can calculate their own specific behavior that they need to do. Every finger can say, I can do it. And so we can't have them all do it. They have to somehow pick one. I don't know how that happens, but my point is, again, I have lots of models of the stapler, and I provide this goal to all of them, and one of them has to actually implement the behavior that's required in that simple example. But they all could, right? It's like, I could do it, you could do it, I could do it, they can do it, but I'll do it, type of thing. I'm just saying words how I'm interpreting what you're saying. So
yeah, no, I think that's kind of exactly it, and as you're kind of pointing out, Vivian, like obviously, we do need to also do the action at some point, and so clearly there's like a balance between kind of passing the kind of task onward to someone else versus doing it yourself, a little like, I guess, middle management in a company or something. Like there's only so many times you can subdivide a task before someone actually has to do the work or whatever. And maybe pressing a stapler isn't a great example because once we move to the target location, then maybe we can just generate the action or whatever at that point. I think one thing that's clearly important here that I'm not showing, but maybe next time can try and dig into is like we'll also have like models for complex motor systems or whatever, like our hand, whatever. I know we talked about that before, and so like clearly that's involved as well, like in terms of kind of actually executing the action. But so just to kind of like why not just send actions? Why send kind of goal states as well? I think kind of consistent with what you guys are kind of thinking. Basically it's just easier for the higher level learning module to kind of know nothing about the lower level learning module. It basically just has to say kind of can someone get this for me? This is what's needed. And kind of separates out knowledge of sort of necessary states so that the coffee machine button is pressed from the actions that can achieve it. So, often, talked about how you can press stuff with an elbow or whatever, like that's kind of independent of the necessary state. It also feels, like this would be easier to kind of represent when we've satisfied the top-down directive, because then basically the current state will equal the target state, and that's, if that representation is L2, L3, then that's being sent forward. So then we know immediately whether kind of we were successful or not. Whereas if you send an action, how do you really know whether what you wanted to happen has actually happened?
I'm not sure actions are sent down at all. I mean, my assumption walking in would be that no action sent down. It's just desired states. And
but what about, I mean, the motor output from L5 to...
Well, that's a little weird. So it's pretty simple. Imagine I have a 2-level hierarchy, and the top one says, we want to press the stapler. So then the lower level says, okay, one of us will do it and we'll generate the behaviors. So what are the motor outputs of the higher level region doing? How are they expressed? I mean, the way that Sherman and Guillory write about it is that those layer 5 cells just project subcortically, and so they do something. Here's one possibility and stop me if you're not following this. They've argued that everywhere they look, and they make that distinction. They don't say they say we haven't looked everywhere, but everywhere we look, we've seen these layer 5 cells that project subcortically. That doesn't mean they all project to the same place subcortically. For example, the motor system we have in our bodies is outside of the cortex, is already hierarchically arranged. We have nerve centers in our spinal cord, we have them in our brainstem, then there's the cerebellum, and there's a series of stuff going on. It's, in fact, many of our ingrained behaviors are already sort of hierarchical in some sense, or they're complex. And so a level 2 region may be saying not move the finger. It may be saying something more higher level, like telling the whole motor system below, like, I want that the lower level motor system is already maybe capable of interpreting some of these high level commands. You know what I'm saying? It's not like layer 5 and region 2, high regions and lower regions are projecting to the same cells. They may be projecting to a sort of a complementary hierarchical motor system that already exists in the old brain. And so all they're trying to do is saying, if I can find a correlation between my output and some other system down below, I'll do it. So a higher level layer region learning module, layer 5 may project someplace to the, in the basal ganglia or something like that. And the lower level one just projects right to the spinal cord. That kind of thing.
And they're all subcortical projections. Like, does any of it go to like motor cortex or anything like that? Or
well, all right, but motor cortex is in the cortex, so I'm not aware of layer. Again, it's not. I'm not aware of anyone saying layer 5 cells project. I'm not even sure I've read anything other than what Sherman and Gilleby have written about this. So they've written a lot, but I'm not sure who else has written about it. But they say those layer 5 cells, the ones that we're talking about here, the intrinsically birthing ones, the bigger ones, they say they all do the following thing. They have an axon, it splits, one part of the axon goes out of the cortex, someplace in the old brain, and that's, quote, related to behavior. And the other split goes to is passed back up in the hierarchy to the region above through the thalamus. Okay. And but there's no indication that those particular layer 5 cells, the ones that project subcortically, go anywhere else. There are the other layer 5 cells which seem to be voting. Those cells do not project subcortically. But they do project to other layer 5A cells elsewhere in the cortex, broadly. So there seems to be a voting layer going on there, and then a motor output layer that only exits the cortex or passes up the hierarchy. That's it. So that's what they've written. I don't know if it's true, but that's what they've written.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, but I don't think. I mean, basically, it's consistent at some level. All the things we're talking about. We just have to refine some of this. So anyway, I argue that there's no reason to pass down behaviors.
So
while it certainly doesn't look like it doesn't look like it's happening. So, for whatever reason. So I thought about this, this idea. This bothered me in the past, and so I said, hey, there is evidence that these layer 5 cells do project to different levels of hierarchy in the old brain. So it may be that the cortex is just trying to model your existing body's behaviors, like walking and reflex reactions and so on, that are old brain behaviors. And the cortex is mapping its hierarchy somewhat onto the hierarchy of the old brain, so that a high level region of the cortex can give a sort of a high level state goal or behavior goal to some part of the old brain, and a lower region of the cortex would projecting to a lower behavioral section of the old brain.
Right.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we can basically express all hierarchical behavior in the cortex as just target states, and at the lowest level, then like something in the motor cortex would, for example, say my target is that my hand is in this grasping state over there, and then that could be sent down subcortically and actually be turned into motor commands.
Right, but remember, the layer 5 cells themselves never actually innervate a muscle. And so it's all, in some sense, like, I'm just going to state that. I don't know how to interpret that, but there's never a point where a layer 5 cell says, contract this muscle. It says, the way I interpret that is the layer 5 cells project to some subcortical motor section, and it associatively learns to say, when I'm in this state, the layer 5 cells are in this state, I want to associate I want to be able to invoke these subcortical cells when they're in this, if they're in an equivalent state. So it's never directly driving musculature. It's always just trying to influence the old motor system to do something. It's learning to pair its representations with something that already exists elsewhere. That's how I've interpreted it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to, an interesting way to think about it. I think, that's a nice abstraction.
That's what the evidence suggests.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you guys are on board with sending states down, because I was worried maybe that was going to be contentious, but no, it sounds like we're all on a similar.
I'm going further, Niels. I'm saying now that we're talking about it, I kind of recall that I don't think anybody ever sends any motor actions. They send, in some sense, some representation that says you should do something to get in the right state.
Achieve the state.
Right.
But and so just quickly kind of wrapping up. So basically if you send that, then it's very easy to tell if it's been achieved, and then you kind of a higher level learning module then knows, for example, it can continue, if it's carrying out a complex series of actions, then it knows, okay, the coffee machine is on because the state of the coffee machine is now what I was asking it to be in. And then similarly, kind of a low level learning module can maybe quickly fire back if a target state is completely outside of its possible state space. It's just going to say, look, I can't help. And if everything is saying that, then you would more quickly realize, okay, I need to at a high level try a different approach. And then this kind of, I think, connects to this idea of like, well, what if it's all kind of states? One of the kind of thoughts was, okay, can we kind of unify the sensory and motor representations a bit more? And basically if the motor kind of outputs in some sense are target states, then they're essentially analogous to the kind of sensory or object representations that we're sending up through the hierarchy, the kind of L2, L3 representations. So that kind of means that they're not as, they're kind of fundamentally linked.
We're linking, but it's still mysterious exactly. We don't really know yet how we represent object states, but we do. So we're saying everything is true.
However it's represented,
we don't know how it's done yet. Okay.
I was just thinking about that, because actually if we put it this way now, the output states and the input target states will have the exact same format. It will be like object that poses and sensors that poses. And then in the hierarchy, it's not that big of a problem, because you just get the target states from the higher level hierarchy, and then you try to kind of you send back at what state you're at. And but then the main question that popped up in my head is, where does the highest level target state come from to begin with? Like, where does it come from that I want to make a cup of coffee now?
So I was thinking, I was also thinking about this. It's almost kind of philosophical, but I feel like at a certain level, like the hypothalamus and stuff like that, and the amygdala, like just basic needs like hunger and sleep and stuff.
So my suggestion on how, at least how I think about this is like the same way we thought about just object modeling in general. We start off by saying every single cortical column or learning module has to be able to model an object of some level of complexity. Doesn't have to be model everything, but it has to be able to build a true sensory motor model. And so we just focused on that one module, one learning module. How does it do that? I'm working on that still this week. And then we said, oh, well, we'll introduce hierarchy when we need to. And the first time we really introduced hierarchy was with the logo on the coffee cup. And initially, we spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how a single learning module could represent the logo on the coffee cup. And I eventually gave up. And I said, it has to be hierarchy. And now we have a model or theory about how the hierarchy can do that. And so the same thing here with action policies. It seems to me we have to first solve what a single learning module, how does it interact and change the behavior or the state of an object all on its own. Like, we have to understand how we can do that, but it will be limited. And then we'll have to introduce the hierarchy to overcome some of those limitations in the same way we had to overcome the limitations of a logo on a coffee cup. Now, I don't think our goal as here at Numenta at this point in time is to worry about where does that top level goal comes from. Because you're right, Niels, it could be coming from, all kinds of behaviors. I'm hungry, I'm covered, having that someone else's sandwich. I don't know what it is. So I don't think we have to worry about that. I'd be happy just to say, here's a stapler. Our goal is to, push it down, have a staple come out. Or our goal is to open up so we can put more staples. I would be really happy if we could do that. We don't have to worry about all this other outer loop stuff that goes on at the moment. I would avoid that. I would just say, we could just make an artificial system where we just tell it the state we want it to be in and see if it can do it. That would be one thing I would suggest. So
Yeah.
we don't get down.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. What is the kind of the breaking point of one learning module where we actually need the hierarchy and kind of I
already gave you a simple example of the multiple fingers on the cup, where there is an example where I can impose a desired object state on a set of learning modules, and that requires a hierarchy, because in the end I have to decide which of the 10 fingers is going to do it. It's not really a hierarchical composition. I think we're about to be up against our time here. It's not really a hierarchical.
I was like, what is that?
It's not really a hierarchical composition. We're not breaking down a series of behaviors. It's more like hierarchy is also necessary to do something basic that exists in one model, but I don't know how I'm going to implement it. Right? There's multiple ways of doing it, and that sounds a little bit to me like, okay, which finger am I going to use the best to stapler? That may be somehow similar to like, I need to get around this obstacle. What behavior, who can get me around those obstacles? I don't know. Before we exit here, I thought this was great, by the way. I want to make one more point, if I can. You and I briefly exchanged a couple of messages about this, Niels. The sort of the behavior of like making a pot of coffee. Some of those behavioral states are like move to the coffee pot or move my hand to the coffee pot. Those behaviors are going to require the where pathways. And I prefer not to deal with that at the moment. It would be better to say, okay, I'm touching this stapler with my hand, and the fingers are on it, and they're all working in the coordinates in the what space, where we are in the coffee cup, and how do I move my fingers to implement something. Whereas if I say, my hand's at my side and the coffee cup's on the other side of the room, then that's going to be, we can't do that in a single learning module. We can't do that even just with a hierarchy of what modules, right? The evidence to suggest we have to figure out how to navigate to some place first. We should try to avoid tasks that are like that. We're just chatting. Okay. I think we should try to avoid that at the moment. Just try to
that sounds good. I was probably asking because I have reservations about the what where pathway or I think it's obviously not something I think that would be controversial at Numenta, but just like the whole what pathway just implies that there's like no location information or reference frame type stuff in the ventral stream, and
right.
And that's obviously kind of not true. So
but the evidence of the early evidence of the what where pathways is, a person sees an object, if their what pathway is damage, they can see the object, they can't identify it, but they can move their hand to it. And once their hand is on the object, then they know what the object is, right? So they know they have to move to some place, but they don't know what's there. But once they get there and they touch it, they go, oh, I know what it is, and they can manipulate it. So we want to skip the part like, oh, how do I move my hand to the object? We just want to start right at my hand's on the object. Now I want to manipulate it. And that doesn't require the work pathway as much. I think we have to stop here. I'm still slowly working my way through a bunch of papers, working on the sort of the, the detailed model of the column and how it could relate to all these things. So hopefully soonish I'll have something to present on that. I'm just letting you know I'm excited to work on this problem, so I'm working at it, but slowly. So.